I'm just going to set the recording here, and thank you very much, everybody, for coming tonight. This is the first of our Outside the Rails sessions that we're going to be doing 6 of these in total between now and February 17th, with different MLAs presenting legislation that they're working on for the spring sitting. And they're looking for your impact. So you'll get to learn about what they're working on and actually give them some feedback and hopefully have them take away something that will make their bills stronger, give them some good ideas. So today we are joined by Karla Bernard, and she is our opposition critic for education, as well as the status of women. And she's going to be presenting a couple of bills, actually. She's been busy. So you might remember the Election Age Act that she actually introduced in the last session. And that's to lower the voting age to 16. And that was kind of referred back for more consultation, which she's doing right now, including with us today. And she's hoping to be able to bring that bill back this spring. And she's working on another one as well that will make an amendment to the Education Act. Is that correct, Karla? It's the Education Act, right? Right. So that would require misconduct policies in all educational authorities, institutions. So the way we're going to structure this is we're going to spend about half of our time on each. This is going to go for an hour. And so we're going to start with the Education Act amendment that Karla is working on. And she's going to present that to us and just let us know kind of where that bill came from, what she's hoping to accomplish with it. There will be an opportunity for questions just to basically understand, make sure you understand what the bill is about. And then we'll open it up for general feedback and suggestions that you might have for the bill. And then once we're done that bill, we'll move on to the Election Age Act. So in terms of just some general housekeeping stuff here, I'd encourage you, if you want to speak, you can either use the chat to indicate that you want to speak, or you can use the raise hand function on Zoom as well to raise your hand, and I'll keep an eye out and keep a speakers list to make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak, especially when we get into the feedback part of this. And I'm just going to type right now into the chat so that if you're not familiar with where the chat is, then you should hopefully see something light up in orange somewhere on your Zoom toolbar there, indicating that's where you can find that chat feature. So if you want to test that out and type something into the chat, feel free to do that. And also feel free to type any comments that you have into the chat at any time, or any ideas that just come into your head, because we will be exporting the chat from this at the end to provide to Karla, so that even if things are moving quickly and she's busy addressing something that somebody else said, but you have a thought that you want to make sure is captured, that she'll be able to review everything that was written in the chat. And I'm also going to be taking some notes of ideas during the course of this as well, and adding it into the chat, sort of a little bit of live blogging. So in case you see me writing random notes in the chat, then that's what I'm doing. Okay, so with that, without any further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Karla to tell us a little bit about the Education Act amendment that she's working on.
Thank you, Jordan, and thank you everybody for taking time out of your busy schedules to be a part of this. And I'm the first of a few happening, and I'm really excited about it for a whole bunch of reasons. One being that we can strengthen and make our bills and legislation better, and one that we are finding ways to engage with the party on a grassroots level, because that's something that we had identified as priority both in caucus and at the Green Party and with the Green Party. And so we're trying to find ways now to really honor that grassroots democracy, which personally is one of my favorite values of the party. So the first piece of legislation, it's quite old. I can't remember when we tabled it. It's a little bit stuck right now, and I'll explain a little bit about that as we go on. The first one is an act to amend the Education Act. And so basically I'm just gonna bring up some stuff here. I was at the office and I forgot to print one thing off, of course.
Mhm.
Bear with me here. So there were three things happening, actually four things happening when the perfect storm happened for this act. And so basically, we were in committee hearing about, or doing consultations actually in the first part on the Post-Secondary Institution Sexual Violence Act, Sexual Violence Policies Act. And so there was that. Also, CBC did a series on schools in Canada and misconduct, bullying, and violence, which was very concerning, as well as at the time, the Women's Network was releasing the results of a project they had conducted on street harassment, where they found that children and youth were often the victims of this, the targets of that, which was all very concerning. Mix that all together with the fact that having worked in the education system and as a teacher and counselor for the last 15 years, and having your own kind of sneaky suspicions and not quite knowing where to go with them. So the kind of the intended outcome of this is kind of to have a clear path for those who maybe have experienced some misconduct that can be sexual, physical, whatever. So I have a clear path forward for them, as well as a clear path forward for those who are being reported to. As it stands right now in the caring spaces, places to learn policy, it's not in an act, and so it's very vague, and there's some information missing from that policy. So we kind of were thinking, it's so important that the public and family members and friends be involved in this. And so basically, part of this act allows family members, friends, concerned islanders to have input into the creation of a policy and the review of a process of such a policy. There was also something else happening at the time, which is a really good example of why a policy or an act like this is needed. And that's where within the past couple of years, we saw media reports of the Roger Jabbour case. And in particular, the numerous attempts to report and stop the conduct over the years, which were unsuccessful. And we heard from various community groups that were also unsuccessful in the reporting of this. So it was kind of a perfect storm for all of this to come together. And it was actually in a committee meeting where I sat back and thought, I often think out loud and thought, what about our public schools on PEI? They're not under, we're creating these post-secondary regulations, but what about our public schools? And so basically what this would do, so the proposed amendment would require each education authority to have a policy on sexual misconduct. It would require that they establish new requirements for an education authority to seek public input when creating a new policy or reviewing an existing policy, which is something that was very inconsistent over the years when we were consulting with various people. And even people reached out to me when they heard that we were working on this to say that the policy that had been in place, former principals who were very concerned about the lack of any sort of solid policy around this. It would also require each education authority to review the sexual misconduct policies every 3 years, or request for the minister to do so. And it would also provide new regulation making powers to the minister to be able to prescribe any contents that would go into a sexual misconduct policy. So where we are right now with this is we really wanted this to be something that was solid, something that was created with everyone, so that it was something that was user-friendly, that people understood, and that we weren't creating something that was going to be an unintentional beast that people had to work with basically. So right now, where we are with it, we tabled it, I can't even remember. It wasn't in the last sitting. It was quite a while ago. So we're working with the Department of Education and Lifelong Learning to develop the Ministerial Directive. So basically, that is the part where that's a bit contentious and where we're stuck. So what we're suggesting is that there is, and also what we heard loud and clear from the various organizations that we consulted with, the Women's Network, the PEI Rape and Sexual Assault Center, the Advisory Council on the Status of Women, PEI Family Violence Prevention, among others, that a really important piece of this is an annual report, where included in that would be the number of complaints of sexual misconduct reported, the information about the support services and accommodations made available to students as they related to that misconduct, without any identifying information. And so that's why the bill hasn't come forward yet. We're kind of stuck there. Some stakeholders are very concerned about this. I have reached out and sent countless research papers and data that says that indeed, when these reports are made, where reports are, there's an explanation of what the complaint was and what was found and what services and supports were put there, really empowers survivors of this sort of misconduct to come forward and share their story. And so that's kind of that's the whole goal of this, is to make sure that our children are safe, and that our children and youth are empowered to come forward, so that they're not living with this trauma on their own. And because we know what trauma can do, I'm not going to get into all of that because that could be a whole other conversation. So basically, the last thing I'll say about this right now is, right now, other jurisdictions, there's no other jurisdictions that necessarily have this in legislation. But with the Roger Jabbour case and all of the things that I had mentioned earlier, most places address this misconduct through school board policies, and we're proposing legislation to eliminate deficiency in any gray areas. The policy that we had before used a lot of words like shall, could. It wasn't a very solid policy. And we heard, like I mentioned, from various principals that it needed some work. So that's where that came from. So Jordan, I think I'll stop there. And if there's any pieces that I missed, just let me know.
Perfect. And I see that Sally has already put a one question in the chat. She's wondering if misconduct includes things like we learned about in the Governor General's office. So is this exclusively sexual misconduct, or is it other types of harassment or anything like that could be included?
Thanks, Sally. Sorry about that. I have a tickle in my throat. It started, of course, it grew out of the sexual violence policies at the post-secondary level. But what we found in the caring places to learn policy included all of those things. And so that would be kind of any complaints that were to come forward, whether it be physical, sexual, verbal, psychological, any of those sorts of misconducts or complaints.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions about what Karla is proposing here? Okay, so basically, just to recap, if I understand, so this would require basically our school boards at this point, right? Because you're saying the post-secondary institutions already have to have policy on misconduct, sexual misconduct in particular, but this would apply to our school boards, and they would have to have this clear policy, review it regularly. And can you explain the ministerial directive that you were mentioning?
That is really where it's hung up. We've had several meetings and consultations with the public schools branch and the Commission Scolaire Langue Française. And so everyone's on board with this, and they're very supportive of this. The only part that they're hung up on is the minister's directive, where they would have the duty for an annual report. There's a lot of concerns that because of the nature of the size of PEI, that there would be a lot that people would be able to identify where these were coming from. And so where we are right now is trying to find a way that everyone is comfortable with that. and, you know, we were back and forth, and I actually did kind of, I guess, a second round of consultations just to make sure that I got that right, because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't, you know, you want to just ensure that I started to second guess myself a little bit and think, you know, well, okay, because as a teacher and an educator, I get it 100%. And I know that your main goal as an educator is to protect children. And of course, that's as a parent, I consider myself still a teacher and a counselor, and it still is kind of at my heart and soul to do that. And at the same time, I'm reading all of this research and data that says that indeed reporting is a huge key component of that. And it's new. You know, there's not a lot of policies around that have that yet because it is very new. So there were a couple of people that raised that concern. And so they asked me for proof that that was something that was happening. And so I have read countless. I sent 7 to start and told them if they needed more, I would be happy to send more. That does indeed say that that's an important piece. So that's where it stuck. It's not that people don't want this in place. It's that the reporting mechanism is a bit contentious right now. And I totally understand it. So we're working on a way to come together and find some sort of way forward that everyone agrees with. So it is very much right now, it sits with the Department of Education. They're kind of working through that right now. And we're just kind of waiting for some more feedback so we can figure our way forward.
Great. And Walter had typed a question to me here asking if there's any types of misconduct that are outside the scope of the proposed policy.
Could you repeat that, Jordan, please?
Are there any types of misconduct that are outside the scope of your legislation?
Not that I'm aware of. And kind of where, if there is, I would love to know about it. But so basically, oh, I lost my train of thought. But any sort of complaint that comes forward where there's been, you know, a clear violation of what should happen in an educational institution would be included in that scope. I do have a copy of the legislation. I don't know how to share my screen. And if you're anything like me, like that legislation just, you know, I read through it and I do my best and there's parts I get, but I really need help digesting it. I'm happy to share it, but if you're like me and are like, what the heck is this? Don't worry.
So Karla, I just made you a co-host so that you would be able to share your screen.
Okay.
Now, you should see the share screen button if you want to put that up.
Okay.
And in the meantime, is there anything in particular that you would like some feedback from the group on in terms of this this legislation?
Well, this is a tough one because it's so far along. This is one that we had thought would have been passed a while ago. Again, I'm sorry, I'm just kind of slimming through this. It's kind of, how should I do this, Jordan? What's the best way should I just leave it and let people read it, or?
Yeah, maybe if you just leave it on there. So it's just a short little bill there.
And I'm not 100% sure if this is the latest bill because I'm seeing just the sexual misconduct here. So I may have to just get back to you on the rest of it because we did talk about, it did expand from there. So I'm not sure if this is the latest bill because I'm just seeing sexual misconduct.
Okay. So does anybody here have any thoughts on this kind of sticking point that Karla was mentioning about the reporting requirements and, you know, doing that kind of reporting while protecting people's confidentiality? And feel free to unmute yourself and speak anytime.
They want to move on to the good stuff.
Everyone wants to talk about the Election Age Act. Okay. And
If I speak like this, can you hear me or just?
yes, we can hear you.
Yep.
Yeah. Hi, Walter.
Just a couple of words from Walter here. No, I appreciate the work that attention behind this. As you, my question was, what type of misconduct is outside the scope? And so again, what you've shown me here is really specific to sexual misconduct. And I guess where I was heading with my question is professional misconduct on behalf of teachers or the professionals included in this, or is the intent to include that? Even such things as not delivering the prescribed curriculum, something of that nature.
Walter. So that is, thank you for that. That part's not in the scope of this. And I'm sorry, it's been so long since we've dealt with this one that I'm having a hard time remember talking about the scope. So this was very much grew out of, because a lot of the questions that came were, well, what about, teacher to teacher and, like not just student to teacher. So this one really includes, this one in particular is for students to teachers, students reporting misconduct to teachers. As far as the scope that you were talking, Walter, that is outside of this particular scope. And this one really and truly grew out of what we had been working on at the time and what was in the newspapers at the time. And there's a lot of talk of that going on right now. I think that there's a real appetite for some education reform and the way that we do things and the way that we teach things. The education system that we have now is very well. It's from the Industrial Revolution ages, and where the intent was to graduate people with these specific competencies, and they don't necessarily at all levels match. And I think that what you're talking about, Walter, is really, really important, because a lot of the curriculum is not really prescribed exactly. And so, if a teacher doesn't have a particular interest in an area, for example, I taught grade 1. And I had a lot of interest in Indigenous culture. I had a lot of interest in social justice. And so a lot of my teachings were around forming, we would have these conversations, and I challenged them, and we played a lot, and not all teachers were there. And so, if you don't have a particular interest in a certain area, if you're not feeling confident in a certain area, you deliver things a lot differently. And so, Walter, that is really an interesting, and that's a big question. And I would love to sit and chat more about that with you sometime, if we could do that.
Sure, anytime. I'm just trying to wrap my head around, again, the scope or the intent within that scope, because your main concern about reporting ties into that scope. Very much, and what you mean by reporting on the effectiveness, like the accountability of the regulations and the policy, is that what you're talking about with the reporting, or the reporting of the person being harmed to someone else? I'm not sure what you're talking about when you're talking about reporting. So
the main part of the reporting, thank you for that clarification, I misunderstood. The main point of that reporting is so that we have an idea of what we're dealing with here. When I first came at this, the way I explained it and the way that I understand it is, as a parent, I want to know what to talk to my kids about. Am I talking to my kids about, something really small, or am I talking to my kids about something a lot bigger? And we want to have age appropriate conversations. But as a parent, if we don't know what we're dealing with in our schools, we don't need to know the full scope. We don't need to know the gory details at all. We just need to know what sort of things should we be talking to our kids about. And as a grade 1 teacher, I know a lot more happens than meets the eye. And I don't mean that in misconduct ways, but I mean in what our children understand and what our children are doing at different ages. And so this is really a way for us to keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening in our schools and help to guide our conversations with our kids, to help them know what's right and what's wrong. Because I mean, we're dealing with kids from, potentially 4 or 5 years old to 17, 18. And, there's a huge learning curve in there, and not all conversations happen in the home. And when they do, you want to be prepared to have those conversations in a way that you don't want to be talking about something much more serious if you don't have to be. It's just kind of a way to keep your finger on the pulse of things, and so that things don't get so far out of hand as they have in the past. Does that clarify?
So the intent of this policy is to gather data, not to necessarily ensure that there's interventions in place in the school.
Oh, that's another part of it. Thank you for that. That is another part. So that part of the reporting is what interventions were put in place, what services were put in place as a result of this report.
In conjunction with that, also data gathering in terms of incidents and cases and things of that nature.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Well, we can talk later on about that if you want at any time, but
yeah.
Appreciate it.
And that goes for anyone, please, really and truly, what guides my work, what guides our work is people reaching out to us, because what I think isn't necessarily what everybody else thinks. And so I really value having conversations with people so that I know I'm on the right path, because I know I don't have all the right answers, but I know that there are lots of people who do.
Just one more quick question of smuggling. Is the Home and School Association involved in this process as well?
The Home and School Association. I can't answer that question honestly right now. I have a full list. Is Heather's on this call? Heather, are you?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, hi,
well,
Heather.
We'd be happy to review and consult, and I mean, I'm listening, and anything that has to do with the students' well-being and safety, we are certainly interested in. And so I don't know, off the top of my head, I can't remember if I think this bill came about a while back, and I think we probably saw it then, but
Sure.
we're always available and willing to consult and listen and bring that feedback around.
And is there a student body or a student representative that's also having input into this?
Do you know what, Walter? No, there is not. And one thing that I've learned in the evolution of this process, this one came forward a long time ago. And one thing that consultation has been my biggest learning in this whole thing. And as the evolution of children's rights since the pandemic has started, especially, that's a really great point, Walter. And actually, that's perhaps I'm going to make a note of that as a next step to kind of talk through.
It's also a good segue into the next issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And Oliver's on this call here too. So maybe Oliver and I can talk about that after. Walter, thank you so much.
Speaking of consultation, Heather had put another question into the chat earlier asking whether you consulted with the new child advocate on this bill.
The child advocate, yeah, I don't have my exact list with me. I am not sure if we have done that, because he would have been, I've had tons of chats with him, but he would have been put in place after this. So I'm going to double check that, Heather. And if he hasn't, I will definitely run that by him. Thank you for that.
Okay, that's great. Anything else that anybody would like to either suggest or ideas that you have, questions that you might still have? Yeah, Barbara just suggested maybe you could find student reps from each county.
Yeah, we can definitely do that.
Yeah.
And there's also,
oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say it's a bit tricky just with child protection issues and duty to report things. So it's something that I might have to look at a little bit deeper, but certainly not opposed to any of these ideas. absolutely. I just may have to look into that because I'm not sure what that would say. I'm not sure how that would go, but I will look into it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Oliver was suggesting that perhaps that the each family of schools probably has student reps on their district advisory councils.
Yeah.
So that might be a place to check.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. So unless anybody else has anything else they want to say about this particular piece of legislation, then we can move to the Election Age Act. Just give you another chance to raise your voice or your hand. Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Okay, we're on to the Election Age Act. So Karla, this is a lot shorter of a bill. Basically involves changing 1 digit in an
Yeah.
existing law, does it not?
Yeah.
Can you tell us
Basically.
where this bill came from and where it is at now?
Yes. So this bill on PEI was originally brought forward by Peter Bevan Baker in 2017. And then throughout the pandemic, as I was reading different research and different data coming out about how our children were faring out across the world, I just started to panic. And I wasn't the only one, and I had various people reaching out to me, and we started working together. And eventually, what came out of that, I knew I wanted to do something. I had no idea what it was. And through a whole bunch of people working together, not just in our office, but from various community organizations and government departments, we came up with the idea for a child and youth table. The name has changed right now, and it is now called the Child and Youth Advisory Committee of the PEI Office of the Child and Youth Advocate. Rolls right off the tongue. And so, so we came up with a term of reference, and we had everyone around the table, and it kind of started from there, and it grew. So then at the same time, I was learning a whole lot more about national organizations who are advocating to have the voting age lowered and the reasons for it. I have a natural obsession with brain development. And so knowing what I know about brain development, it made me kind of just go in a very specific direction about, what are the brains of our youth, 16 to 17-year-olds, what's going on there. And I was hearing so many, as I looked back through what had happened in 2017, as I heard arguments from various places, I was like, what is that? Are they mature enough to do this? Let's look into this. So basically I looked into it and realized that the question should no longer be, should 16 and 17-year-olds have the right to vote, but yet to reach out to organizations and say, how would this impact your organization? Would you need further resources? Are there things we're not thinking of? And so the information that has been coming back has been insane. And Oliver Oliver was our expert on the floor, for it with Nate from our office. And he was fielding questions and did a bang up job. But that was back, when was that, Oliver? Everything runs together. December?
I think it was
November?
back in November.
November. And how much this has evolved since then has been incredible. I have to say that since being elected, I think this has been the hugest learning that I've had. And so basically through all of that, we were at a meeting up in Surrey, and we were talking about possible legislation, and someone brought up the Election Age Act and said, do we want to go there again? And we all said, yeah, we do. It was part of our platform in the 2019 election. And so we decided, yeah, let's do that. And then we started to have conversations of who would be the best person to bring that forward. And it was decided that I would be, and I was on board and was very excited about it. And so here we are. And so basically our consultation process has been it's still very much ongoing, and this is very much a part of it. So in the beginning, we had reached out to Elections PEI. And so we had a great meeting with Elections PEI, and they had, then from there we had kind of thought, well, the question's not should 16, 17-year-olds have the vote, let's take it forward now. And so it didn't work out that way. People didn't feel we had done enough consultation. Fair enough. I accept full responsibility for that. Let's go back to the table. What does this look like? And so government had made a motion suggesting which organizations we should consult. And what was really funny that evening that Oliver was with us and they had decided who should be consulted, they said it in the legislature. And that evening, after the legislature, I went back up to my office and checked my email, and I had 2 emails from different organizations that were like, of course we support this, here's our letter, which was really, really great. And so basically we're finding from our consultations now, so we've reached out to various organizations based exactly on the motion that was put forward by government. So we've already consulted with Elections PEI. We're waiting for feedback from the Federation of Municipalities. We have feedback. We reached out to all of the student councils. We have done consultation with the Child and Youth Table. Sorry, it's not the Child and Youth Table, what it was in the chat there. Onaway, NCPEI. I wish I had my list with me. I will get that. I'll look at that after if anyone's curious about who else that we consulted. I do have that.
Were there any individual municipalities that you consulted aside from the Federation?
Well, we went to the Federation. They were having a board meeting. And so whenever we reached out to them, they said, we will have a board meeting coming out or on the 21st it was, and we will send our feedback there. So we were going to wait to see what we got from there. We consulted with the public schools branch, the Commission Scolaire Langue Française, there's young voters of PEI. And what's really interesting is what's coming back is, because the scope was very, very specific. So basically the question was, how does this impact your organization? What extra supports might you need? And so some of the things that came back were really interesting because they were talking about, we don't want our schools to be a ground for politicians to come in and try winning votes. And that's fair enough. Of course, we don't want that. Our education doesn't support that. So looking at changing some of the courses. So if this bill were to pass, there would be some really specific things that would need to happen along with that, including curriculum. I noticed there was something in the chat down here that caught my eye. Oh, the other jurisdictions. So Norm, that's a great question. And there's not there. So Austria is the only one that you can really find data for. And what they found out of Austria was that nothing changed between 16 and 18 in terms of being able to handle the responsibility, the maturity level, the engagement. The only thing that they found that changed between the ages of 16 and 18 was knowledge. And that was something that they were able to change through their education system. So that was really very interesting. And I have tons of, we've done so much research on this and so much reading on this. I have a lot of different articles. Someone in particular who came in to talk to our office, she came in to talk to our office shortly after getting elected, Alona Doherty. I know she had written a support letter for us. She is really, really, she talks about the fact that between the ages of 15 and 25, you're at your most innovative and creative. And so we have this whole, we have huge, wicked problems right now, like poverty and climate change and housing issues and all these huge things. And we don't tap into our most valuable resource, our 15 to 25-year-olds. And she talks about and presents all of where she got all of her information on how by tapping into them, we could solve our world's problems. And so, you can't, if we're going to look at that and we talk all the time like, oh, well, have you consulted the youth? Have you talked to the youth? And so this is just a way to put our money where our mouth is, to say, yes, we value it. And it's funny, one of the biggest criticisms that I hear is, oh, it's just, you just want to win the Green Party votes. And I just have to laugh at that, because there's no, there was the civics, what was the name of, I can't remember the organization that did during the last election, they looked at the student vote. And while there would have been more changes, there would have been some changes, like the NDP would have been in there, the Greens would have had a couple more seats. There wasn't a whole lot of change, and so where I think that what it would do is, right now is parties like the Green Party are talking more about issues that youth care about, and so they may naturally lean that way. However, that would force political parties to listen to youth, and so it would become mainstream that their issues would be talked about by all parties. And so that, that is just kind of a natural thing that would have to happen with a bill like this.
Karla, is it correct that they also have in Scotland you can vote at 16?
Yep, there's areas of Scotland that you
right.
can vote at 16. There's various places where you can, but there's not a lot of data. I want the data to say, like, how's it going? So, and even in a lot of the reports that I read, they talked about Austria being the only place that have. So there were a couple of other places that did it. They tried it. And what they found, so they kind of lumped, there was even in the States, they lumped their research, they agreed with what was found in Austria, that it wasn't, maturity didn't change. The only thing that changed was knowledge. And I was listening to a podcast one day because I really wanted to hear all sides of this. And they called her a government teacher in the States, and her whole argument for not allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to vote is because the curriculum doesn't teach civics until they're in grade 12.
Yeah.
And I that made me scratch my head and say, is that a reason not to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote? That's a very easy fix. Anyway, yeah.
And Ola just pointed out in the chat that PEI actually already has kind of been a trailblazer in this regard, because in the 2016 voting electoral reform plebiscite, 16-year-olds were allowed to vote, and that was the first time anywhere in Canada that 16-year-olds were given the right to vote in any kind of plebiscite or election or referendum.
Yeah, but it's so funny because most parties allow 14-year-olds to vote in the selection of a party leader. So it's kind of interesting. And I noticed Barbara Dilla, I haven't read all of the chats, but I just noticed what Barbara said about, we give them a lot of responsibilities already. And so the argument that they're not mature enough, I think that we've kind of settled that already. I mean, we let them drive cars, and we let them make health decisions and all of these things. So if I feel that that's almost insulting to our 16 and 17-year-olds to say that they can't handle the vote. And Oliver and I have had extensive conversations on this. Actually, he should be the one talking about this. We've had extensive conversations about this, and just, the conversation has switched now. And so I don't know, Oliver, is there anything that you would like to add to this? Oliver was our expert on the floor. I think I mentioned that before, and he handled it like a champ.
Well, it seems like you've covered, quite a bit of it there, Karla. All the main points that we've talked about in our conversations about, just the general perception of youth maybe not having access to all the information through education. The fact that the youth, they already have so many responsibilities now. This would just be kind of tacked on to the responsibilities that they already have access to at the moment. So I think that you really covered quite a wide variety of them. And in our last discussion, we also talked a little bit about how there's still some youth, even 16, 17-year-olds, that are still a little bit iffy themselves at the idea of lowering the voting age, which may sound a little bit surprising, but it's not actually that's it makes sense whenever you realize that they've kind of been, you know, living in a society where for so long they've just been kind of told where their voice doesn't really matter all that much, and they've just been kind of almost gaslit into believing that that's the truth right now. So I think that's, you know, having this discussion and bringing, you know, this conversation a little bit more to the forefront and talking about how there has to be changes made within the curriculum too, in order to adjust for the fact that they've been kind of growing up with those ideas around them. That I think that's a really good discussion that has to be had.
And thank you for that, Oliver. You just, so one of the things Oliver and I were kind of working on together was how do, like, let's, because one of the things that were said, you know, we need to engage our youth. And what's so funny about that is when you ask, so I reached out to different teachers who are friends of mine who teach high school. And I said, if you have a moment, talk to your students, get them to email me, let me know their thoughts. And a lot of them would say things like, well, no, because my parents will probably be mad, or no, I'd probably just vote the way my parents voted. And I thought that is so just, you know, they don't see themselves as voters. We haven't given them that independence or that responsibility. And, you know, and we were having a discussion in our office because we were talking about having a youth engagement session about it. And which I still would really very much like to do. And it's how do you have that conversation to have them see themselves as voters? Because, you know, in our office, we were having this discussion and we were talking about consulting 16 and 17-year-olds. And one of the women in our office said, it's so tricky. Like, you know, if someone would have asked women before they had the right to vote, do you want the right to vote? And I said immediately, well, I would have said yes. And she said, well, there's probably a lot of women who would have been nervous to say that, you know, their husband, oh no, my husband does that. Or so it's really, it's kind of a conflicting place to be, because of course we want them to have a say in this. Of course we do. And at the same time, you know, they don't see themselves as voters. And so it's bridging that gap. So I feel at this point, before there's a true and a really accurate consultation process done, there almost would need to be an education session done. And so it's very, and the Maritime Noon Sally just mentioned, I was so excited. It was amazing. And Oliver was supposed to be a part of it. And I'm not sure what happened there. So myself, and there was a gentleman from, I can't remember the name of the organization, but a national organization advocating to have the voting age lowered. And out of the 7 callers, every one of them were in favor. I was ready for, you know, I was ready to hear some criticism. I know that you know, not everyone agrees with this, and it is a little bit it sparks some nerves in some people. And anyway, I would be happy to answer any questions. I feel like I've been rambling on for way too long. I'm really excited about this.
Just I'm not sure how to put my hand up other than this. Is there?
That works.
No worries, Walter. This works too.
All right. I know there's a few people, so I'll just make a comment, Carl. First of all, I guess I'm in favor of it. I've worked with kids all my life too, or used to, and high school kids as well. But in the last conversation, we were talking about protecting children. And we're talking about that constituency of children from grades 1 to 12 that need an extra degree of protection by virtue of their vulnerability. And I think to some degree, we have to incorporate that type of protection too with respect to this issue, because, you know, children are more vulnerable. Young people, 16-year-olds are more vulnerable than 26-year-olds. I would argue. And so, you know, to go into this thinking that these constituencies, these schools are going to be free from lobbying or you know, really even politicizing agendas inside the school is a little bit problematic for me. So I'm wondering, back to your misconduct, and I don't want to stretch that last policy beyond the scope of its intent, but I'm thinking even there is that the type of misconduct too, because it can be proselytizing or politicizing the agenda in the school, which is, I would argue, a form of misconduct. But anyways, I think the two are somehow attached, but I'll leave it at that.
And one of the things we talked about, because one of the things, of course, from consultations we heard was that fear that you know, it would be politicians on school grounds and all that entails. So one of the things that one of the policies already in place in our public schools is that, you know, visitors have to go through the main office and sign in and all of that stuff. So there's certain protections there. And Walter, I totally understand what you're saying. And even something as simple, I get invited into classrooms all the time because I was a teacher. The teachers trust me, they like me, and I go in, I'm going into a classroom next Friday. And so I always take it upon myself to not make it partisan. However, I know that not everyone does that, or there could be a slip up on my part, even unknowingly. And so that would definitely be, again, like with this bill, and that's, I had so many questions, and I keep going back to the office, and they're like, but that's not the scope of this bill. This bill is to lower the voting age, and it's up to government to take care of all of the other things. And in saying that, we will have a list of all of the other things that should be addressed with lowering the voting age, because you can't just lower the voting age. There's a whole bunch of other things that need to go with it. Does that answer your question, Walter?
I think you've thought of my concerns for sure.
Okay.
And Karla, Chris here was asking how you're planning on dealing with the criticism or opposition to lowering the voting age from other MLAs. And can you give us a sense of where you feel the majority of MLAs are at on this issue right now?
I would love to keep this nonpartisan too, but it might be a little bit challenging. And I don't mean, this is not about being partisan at all, even though I know most of us here are, or if not all of us are Green Party members, but so not being partisan here. So, you know, so Brad Trivers and Darlene Compton tabled the motion and said, go back and consult these groups. This is the scope. This is what we're asking. The question is, how does it impact your organization, period? And so we took it a little bit farther and said, are there any additional resources you might need? Are there things we're not considering? You know, we kind of changed it that way. And then there were two MLAs who took it upon themselves to make it a personal attack, full of misinformation, to try to gather. The question was, should 16 and 17-year-olds have the right to vote? This is a waste of our time. Why are we talking about this right now? We should, you know, we're in a pandemic. This is not a productive use of time. So there's all kinds of spins out there. And so we are very well aware of the spins because they've already been happening. So one of the things we had talked about, and what we did to a certain extent before, but most MLAs said, oh, well, we need to consult with our constituents first. And so now they've had the opportunity to do that. So what we've done is, after actually Oliver was a big part of this and talking about making it nonpartisan. And so what I've done right before Christmas or right after Christmas, I can't remember, I sent an email to all MLAs and the Premier and said, hey, consultation process is rolling ahead based on the motion. Here's the motion. Here are the questions we're asking. Here is the background information. If you would like to do your own consultation and have your feedback added to our feedback report, please do so. I haven't received any feedback. And then I followed up with that this past week and said, hey, just following up, if you have any issues or concerns with the way consultations are going, if there's anything that you would like to bring forward, please know that I'm here to listen. I haven't heard anything. So there's absolutely going to be spins. And I think a huge part of this is going to be, it's going to be a lot of work. It's going to involve me having a lot of one-on-one conversations with people. And even before the consultation, a lot of them said, well, I have a 15-year-old, or I know, and I can't imagine them being responsible enough to vote the next year. But that argument's not going to stand anymore. That's not the question. And government said that wasn't the question. And so it is a little, I get it. I'm not 100% sure. We're going to see how it goes. but it just doesn't, they're just conflicting in so many different ways. So I think it's just going to be a matter of drawing that to their attention. This is the scope. So your arguments need to be formed on this scope. You wanted us to ask these people, these organizations, we did, this is what they said. So it is going to involve a lot of one-on-one conversations for sure.
Do the people who are most resistant to this realize that by saying no to that, what they're saying about that constituency, with that demographic? Do they realize that in 2 or 3 years that demographic is going to be voting anyways?
Walter, yep. And that's, I'm like, and for me, I just keep thinking, as someone who is as the critic for education, really, I consider myself the person and the Minister of Education, the two, and the third party who represents education. We are the ones who represent the youth in the biggest way, right? Because they are all in our education systems, well, most of them. And so by spreading this information and by saying, like they're not mature enough and this is a waste of time, I could not agree more. Like it's so devaluing and so insulting to our youth to hear that.
Wow.
Lana, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I do.
Great.
As somebody who's almost 50 and has an almost 16-year-old actually son who's now a daughter, he's transgender. I would like to see my child be able to vote and have a say, because I always went with my parents. I always felt like I was defeating them by voting opposite. Well, I just didn't. I didn't vote opposite them until I was of age, in quotations, where I felt like I could actually vote and have a say on my own, because we're Islanders, and Islanders very much typically do what their parents want them to do, right? Like it was said. But as a mom, of an almost 50-year-old mom with a 15-year-old child turning 16 in August, I would like to see my child be able to vote and have a say in legislature. I'm not the one that's going to say, oh, my child is not mature enough, or my child is not. I think that you are where you are at 16 and you do have a voice. And that gives you determination and ability, and it gives you all of those things that you need to carry through your life.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lana.
You're welcome.
And this is a systemic level change. So this is something those are the changes that get the most opposition and there's a lot of fear associated with them, right? But it's by giving 16 and 17-year-olds the vote, we're saying, hey, we consult you all the time, and do we really listen enough that you're reflected in our policies? Hey, and Walter, I felt like a hypocrite whenever you said, have there been youth eyes on this? Because I thought, here I am advocating for the rights of children and youth, and I'm not following the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of the Child by not having youth eyes on this. Even I've had conversations with people who work in the Child and Youth Advocate Office, and we've talked about that a lot, how learning about really advocating and really supporting the rights of children and youth is something, it's not what it really takes you challenging yourself and realizing, oh my gosh, yes, you're right. Of course there should be youth eyes on this. And so it very much is a process. And even myself, as someone who would have considered myself as, of course, the rights of children and youth, I have learned so much through this bill that I'm like, oh my gosh, I thought I was, and I'm still very much lifelong learner.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. And we're at 8 o'clock, so we'll wrap it up. But Karla, I hope you were able to take some takeaways from here. And I could see you have, because you just told us about one of them. And I hope that this was valuable to all of our participants here as well. And Karla, are there going to be any other public consultation opportunities, or are there other opportunities for people to provide feedback to you on these bills?
Well, one of the things that Barbara Dilla and I are working on right now are some more public, some more engagement sessions. And so while we haven't specifically talked about these, I would love for any and all of you to reach out to me at any point in time. If you have any leftover thoughts, Norm, I just noticed yours. That is, yep, you know, that 16 and 17-year-olds adding some energy into the climate change debate. Absolutely. So if there's any lingering thoughts, if you didn't get to share something, if you leave here and think, oh, please, pretty please, call me, email me. There's my email right there. And if you'd like to have a phone conversation, email me and we can get phone conversations. We can have a coffee, whatever you're comfortable with in these crazy COVID times. And I really, these bills, I would really like, I'm going to say one more thing, but I would really love for us to be able to do this sooner in the processes so that we're able to really fully take these into account before they get so far. Not saying I'm not going to take these into account, but I would really love to have these conversations as things are going on. And what I will say is we're a young caucus, and Ola, I know Ola will agree with us 100%. We're a young caucus and we're learning. And one of the things we talk about all of the time is how we want to be connected more to the Green Party. Before we were elected, we were like, we were right in there, and now we're elected and we felt a bit of a disconnect. And I feel that gap being closed now, and I'm so thankful for that. And I want it to fully close, and hopefully after the pandemic's done, we can be together and have more of these conversations, because these are crucial conversations to the future of the party, to the future of politics on PEI. And I don't say that to be cliche, I really mean that 100%. So please reach out anytime.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. And we'll have a very good night. And remember to tune in next week. We're going to have Hannah Bell next Wednesday, and she's going to be talking about her bill to create a poverty elimination strategy for Prince Edward Island, actually embed that in legislation. And then the day after that, next Thursday, we're going to have Lynn Lund talking about legislation she's working on to create an environmental Bill of Rights for Prince Edward Island. So that'll be very interesting as well. There's a couple of other jurisdictions that have that, but that would be a very new thing for PEI, and with lots of implications. So we look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.